In this video, I'm going to show how I mix the main color groups for my main lighthouse painting. I'll start with the sky, and using some cobalt blue, a little bit of black, and some white, I want to make a grayish blue color. My sky is going to be a little different from the photographs. I'm going to have it a little bit darker, and you'll see that I have gradations as I go in the painting itself. When I mix these colors, I mix a little more of each color than you're seeing me mix. I just want to show you how to get there. Whenever you paint, if you'll take the time to mix your main color groups and try to mix up enough paint to get you through the painting, these are oil paints, you'll find that it's way more efficient and less distracting to constantly have to keep mixing these colors. So I'm adding a little bit of violet to the mix here. You may have heard not to use black, by the way, when you paint. And you have to be very careful when you use black, but if you're trying to mix a gray, black is the easiest way to help you get there. The problem with using blacks is you can end up with very muddy colors when you're mixing other colors into this. But as long as you're not getting too carried away, black can be a very useful color to use when you're mixing. Next, I'm going to mix up my browns, the roof color, the shadow on the roof, the chimney, the warm colors in the top of the lighthouse, and even a little bit of what you'll see in the foreground. So I've started off that very dark color that I started with is raw umber, and that reddish color is a burnt sienna. Once I get the darker color that I want, I'll take some of that off and then add yellow ochre or that's burnt sienna to brighten it up. I have two yellows on my palette. One is just a lemon yellow, a medium yellow. This is Winsor and Newton, so it's called a Windsor yellow. The darker yellow is a medium cadmium yellow, also known as a chrome yellow. I don't want the darker version of this to be too dark. The shadow on the roof is not as dark in person as it is in the photograph. And if I need to darken it, I can just add some raw umber. This red is a cadmium red light. There are a number of colors that you can use to get there if you don't want to use cadmium colors. Cadmium colors can be dangerous. You'll be very careful. It's a heavy metal. And if you don't want that sort of thing in your house, I understand, but the cadmium colors are more intense. You just have to use more if you're using an equivalent color like a scarlet. I'm not real big on naming colors. I use the kind of a traditional palette in the traditional names of colors, so they're not going to use chartreuse or things like that. These names can have different meanings, like teal. What is teal? Well, we all sort of know what teal is, but it's better to use, in these videos, I'm going to use more traditional color names. As I make this color lighter, I'm adding that medium cadmium yellow. It's tempting to just use white to lighten colors, and sometimes that's appropriate. It's often appropriate. But when you're dealing with reds, you have to be careful because you're going to end up with pinks, which may not be what you want. Think in terms of warming colors and cooling colors. Blues cool colors down, reds, yellows warm colors up. You can see I don't use very much of the cadmium red on my palette because it's a very powerful color. It's also a very expensive color. If you're not sure how much of what to add to something, then just start off with small amounts of it and experiment. You don't want to waste a bunch of paint to only realize that you haven't quite got where you're going. So starting in with my yellows, if you don't want to use a cadmium yellow, you can just use a medium yellow and add some red to it. Not a cadmium red if you're trying not to use cadmium colors, but a scarlet red, a bright red, as opposed to a deep red or candy apple red. I like the cadmium colors for mixing in small amounts because they're very powerful and you don't have to use as much of them. A lot of the synthetic yellows and reds are quite good these days, and I'm slowly getting away from the cadmium colors. Now I'm mixing a deeper yellow, a little bit redder yellow. As I work on this painting, whether I use a cadmium red to change the color or I like the burnt sienna, just depends on how bright I want it. So the chimney, I would more likely use the cadmium red to make it bright. In the redder yellows toward the bottom of the house, I'd probably use a little more of the burnt sienna. Notice how I just grabbed a little bit of that sky color, that grayish blue, to tone this down. And it helps to harmonize the colors in the painting, to borrow one color from one color group to help change another. So if I've already mixed up the roof color, the brighter roof color, I might use a little bit of that in my yellow and not always just grab the cadmium red or the burnt sienna. When I want a color that's almost black without using black, I just use some raw umber and cobalt blue. These last two colors I'm mixing up just to give me some shadow colors on the house. And as I paint, I may add a little more violet or a little more blue or gray to these. I'm not trying to mix up every single color that I'm going to use, just the main color groups, so I can have a starting place and be more efficient as I paint. Colors are not as bright in nature as they appear to us. Artists talk about unmodulated colors right out of the tube. And, you know, if that's the kind of art you want to produce, more power to you, but to paint realistically like this, you've got to be careful that your colors are not as bright as your brain wants you to think they are. The photograph that you're seeing on your screen is going to appear a lot brighter than a photograph that you can print. And it's going to appear brighter than what you can match with oil paint. You can simulate it. You can fool the viewers into thinking you've done that. You don't want colors that are too bright, but you also don't want to make them too muddy, which is why you have to be very careful if you're using blacks when you mix colors, especially when you're painting wet on wet.